You know me, I'm the only survivor of the BBC production team. I was producer of the A305 Architecture and Design course, worked with the course team very closely from 1970, I don't know when we started working on it, 1972, 3, and it went out in 1974. That's who I am anyhow. It was new, it involved new uses of television. I think it involved innovations with radio and broadcast supplements around the radio and television to enhance the teaching experiences of students. It reached out to the general public as well, because it went out on the general airwaves and we got a lot of interest from the general public. There was a good team of us. There was, I was the course coordinating producer. My colleague Ed Hayward was a producer working on it with me. There were one or two other producers who chipped in, did one odd programs here and there. And there was one particularly experienced radio producer, Helen Rapp. Nancy Thomas was the senior producer, the arts faculty at the BBC. And then the OU team, of course, we related to very closely. And that was headed by Tim Benton as the course team chairman, and his then wife, Charlotte Benton, who was a researcher. And then there were a number of other people, the Open University, in the team working on it. And it was a group, we all got on well, and we realized we were doing interesting things, and we were getting a lot of feedback from the general public and from other academics, saying that we were doing something new and different, and architectural history hadn't been taught like this before. It was looking at the history of architecture of the period and trying to understand what the architects intended, what the circumstances were in which they designed and built, and how the buildings were created and adapted by them in the process, using documents and visual evidence, and of course film of buildings. It was filming in Berlin. Wearing a funny hat because it was pouring with rain all the time we were in Berlin. This must be between the showers, with Tim Benton sitting on top of the van looking at his script. We were all very young in those days. That must be our cameraman, or assistant cameraman, I think, these two. How did it all begin? I can remember talking to Tim about it very early on, before the course was approved by the university. I knew very, very little about architecture of this period, modern architecture. Tim worked out the course, and it was approved by the professor of art history at the time, and put forward and approved by the university as a course. And the next stage was we had to go, as all courses did, to a committee called the Broadcast Subcommittee. They had worked out various criteria for awarding broadcasting to courses, and a lot of it was based on showing processes, because in science it was very important to be able to see technical processes. Although you couldn't see a colour changing in a test tube, you could see other things in the studio in black and white experiments, and technical machinery working, etc. Russ Stannard looked at our proposal and said, well, why are you asking for film? Because buildings don't move. And it was a very good question. Buildings don't move, so why film them? And we thought for a while, and I can't remember how we came up with it, whether it was, probably was Tim, not me, I expect, came up with the right explanation, was that buildings don't move, but humans move through buildings, and you experience buildings through moving through them. So that was accepted, and we were awarded a good amount of resources for studio and film to get on with, to work out how to use them. And of course, it was clear from that moment on that, our programs were going to show the experience of moving through space as much as possible in buildings. And that's what we aimed to do as much as we could. Obviously, you could do that more with the film programs, where you could go out on location. You could achieve it in a slightly less dramatic way in the studio, using stills and plans and things like that. But it was a huge jump forward from the architectural history I did when I was a student at the Courtauld Institute, which was all based on one photo of one building, black and white, grainy, in a book, taken in 1924, Radio vision is obviously not pure radio because it's attached to pictures. In the same way that video cassettes are not transmitted purely television because they're recorded and available to be watched at any time of day or night. But radio vision goes back a lot longer back than video cassettes, because I believe that radio vision was done before the war. There was a series done about art which with transparencies were sent to viewers who requested it. But it was the third program, which was a rather elite program for educated people, and so it would have been probably rather a specialized audience. We had the resource of radio, and we realized that for the art history area, radio was useful because you could have people talking about art, but it had a poor visual content, zero visual content. So we came up with the radio vision idea, which was extremely successful, because what we were able to do were to refer students to pictures, but also refer them before the program to look at the pictures, and to do certain exercises using the broadcast notes on the pictures before the program, then to listen to the program, and then do follow-up exercises afterwards in the broadcasting supplements. And in this way, we were able to, I think, maximize on the ephemeral character of radio by really maximizing on the cognitive process by which people talk and think about art and architecture. You go to the broadcast supplements, you've got all your notes there, you've got the questions, you're set these questions. You might like to look at the following questions before you listen. Then afterwards, discussion. This is what my view of these questions is. It wasn't directorial in the sense we said this is what the answer is, but this is how I would answer them. So they also have been given models to use in their projects of how to ask questions about a building, and then afterwards to try and answer them and come up to justify their answers. So radio vision, I think, was a great success, useful use of the medium. Drawings. Universal International Exhibition, Paris, 1900. We're talking about a 50-minute program in this studio, this room. 86 stills were used and filmed in real time. And I think 2 days to do it in, 9th to 10th of August, 1972. And you can see here the various sequences, the order we did them in, the telejector slides, that's the slides which have written captions on them, the caption numbers, how it was all planned out throughout the 2 days. 4 cameras, 3 zooms, 1 boom, tapes, grams, autocue, 1 floor monitor, TK, that's telecine, to play and film into the programme. We had some very nice archive film of the moving escalator at the exhibition from 1900. And then this shows all the shots, how we keep having to cut and cue the cameras, and I would be directing the cameras, pan left, track in, etc., etc. And my PA would be saying, on coming to camera 3, caption 10 next, stand by. And I would do cut to camera 3, hold and pan right. And at the end of the music, we fade out to the next one. It was all done live, nerve-wracking. You were completely wrecked after a day's filming.
That's the photo of the model, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the photo of the model of the Einstein Tower, which we made in our special effects studio, combined with the very brilliant scrape-back drawings done by Pauline Talbot. Mendelssohn said that the idea of the Einstein Tower came to him when he was in the trenches in the First World War, and he was listening to Bach and drawing. And so we tried to recreate that using Mendelssohn's voice, read by Gabriel Wolf. And we animated the drawings to make it look as if they were being drawn. As the music grew and swelled, the drawings developed. This is some film of the animation from the Mendelssohn's drawings. It was very good how the animation worked. Yeah. The graphic designer, she developed it. It's called a scrape back. You take the picture, the drawing, put it on an acetate sheet, and you rub out a bit, and then you film it again, and you rub out a bit more, like an animation, frame by frame, and then you film it like that, put the frames together, so it goes down to nothing, and then you play backwards. Peter Montagnon, the first head of Open University Production Centre here, had been the co-producer of Civilization. But he wasn't a stuck-up snob or anything like you might think, or old-fashioned BBC ex-army type like you might have imagined. He was very, very perceptive. So he encouraged us to use production values. There were always huge controversies about the values we should have in the OU. On one side, on the right, if you like, were people who wanted to be more like BBC General Service and also thought about themselves as having a future career outside the Open University. And they would like to have music, they'd like to make it like Civilization, and they'd like to have the academics looking very smart. And then the other side, more on the left side, was the idea to make them austere, which austerity was a good word in those days, it's not now, but to have as simple as possible, and to concentrate on the evidence and not have incidental music, and have simple graphics, simple title sequences, and put all the money which was available into locational filming. And we never resolved these two tensions. And they always kind of played off against each other. But they out of those tensions, they asked all the questions, what were the programs about, really? Were they about self-glorification? Were they about teaching? Who were we teaching? Who did we want to communicate to? Did we want to show off to the general public? Did we want to be thought of seen in the Sunday papers as a rival to the BBC? Did we not mind about that sort of publicity? Who were the people we were teaching? Who did we want to teach? What sort of education were we purveying, you know? So all these questions came out, and none of these things were thoroughly resolved ever, because it was always a movable discussion, and in each different subject you went to. Los Angeles, the structure behind the scene. Rainer Banham. I think he was a big influence on the course, and he did the radio program, and he was someone who followed what was going on very closely and gave us a lot of support, I think. Very much missed. Banham looks at Los Angeles, and he looks at the structure behind it, which involves a complete socio-economic view, which is really a kind of Marxist-inspired methodology, isn't it? To understand something in its whole context, historical and cultural context. And he sees it as a product of capitalism and other forces in America. And, you know, the similar structures are there behind everything, but were certainly there behind what was going on in the OU and the BBC. And there was always this this problem about Marxism, that some of the newspapers got it into their heads that the OU was a Marxist organisation, which of course it wasn't. And, you know, they talked about Reds under the beds and everything like that, and there was a complaint that some courses had Marxist bias, which may have, but others didn't, you know. I mean, I think the thing about the OU is that there may have been some old Marxists there at the beginning, and there were, but they didn't come from a new sort of Baudrillard generation at all. They came from the old socialist Fabian background of making education available to working class and to people who had not the opportunity to have education. But it wasn't a radical rethink of what the education meant. It was accessibility. And, you know, it goes back to the pre-war days when there were workers' educational institutes. Some were even men only, you know, which were open to workers, and it was a sort of charitable Christian socialist approach to education. And I think those are the roots of the OU, because that's where Jenny Lee and Harold Wilson all come from, that kind of background. But of course there were people at that time in the 70s, you know, Marxism was making a lot of influence on academia, and there were lots of number of academics in the arts and literary area who were quite keen on Marxist methodology. And some courses may have had that, you know, flavour justifiably. And possibly the modern art and modernism, that got this big criticism for it. But it wasn't a sort of crude example of, you know, Marxism taking over. It was just, it was influenced by Marxist methodology.